The steak sizzled softly as it was placed on the table. The man sitting alone didn't look like someone anyone would notice. No tailored suit. No flashy watch. No bodyguard standing nearby. Just an old jacket, slightly worn boots, and a calm face that looked like it had seen the world without needing to prove anything to it. He nodded politely. "Thank you," he said quietly. The waitress forced a tired smile and turned to walk away, when suddenly she paused. In one smooth motion, so subtle that no one else noticed, she slid a small folded note beneath the edge of his plate. Her fingers trembled. She didn't explain. She didn't look back. She just walked away as if nothing had happened. The man stared at the plate for a moment, confused. Then slowly he reached for the note. As he unfolded it, the noise of the restaurant faded. The laughter. The clinking glasses. The loud voices of men bragging about money and power. Gone. His eyes scanned the first line. They widened. His fingers tightened slightly around the paper. For the first time that night, Keanu Reeves stopped breathing for a second. The note wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic. But every word hit harder than applause ever could. Around him, no one noticed. A group of wealthy diners nearby laughed loudly, mocking the waitress for moving too slowly. Another table snapped their fingers, demanding better service. Keanu sat still, staring at the words in his hand. Not because he was offended. Not because he was exposed. But because someone, a stranger, had seen him. Not as a celebrity. Not as a name. Not as a face on a screen. But as a human being. He slowly folded the note and placed it beside his plate. His appetite was gone. Across the room, the waitress was being scolded by another customer. Her shoulders were tense. Her eyes lowered, the familiar posture of someone used to being treated as invisible. Keanu watched quietly. In that moment, something shifted. This was no longer just dinner. This was no longer about staying undercover. This was about something much bigger. And whatever happened next, no one in that restaurant was prepared for it. The restaurant was packed that night. It was the kind of place people came to be seen. Low lights, polished wood tables, soft jazz in the background, and loud conversations that somehow drowned it all out. The air smelled of grilled meat, expensive cologne, and ego. At the center tables sat groups of well-dressed businessmen. Watches flashed under the lights. Credit cards were slapped down before checks even arrived. Laughter erupted too loudly, too often, the sound of people desperate to remind the room that they mattered. At the very corner, almost hidden by a pillar, sat Keanu Reeves. No one recognized him. That was the point. He had chosen the table carefully. Away from attention. Away from cameras. Away from the noise of fame that followed him everywhere else. Tonight, he didn't want special treatment. He wanted to see the world as it treated ordinary people. He opened the menu slowly, even though he already knew what he would order. When the waitress approached, her movements were quick but exhausted. She'd been on her feet for hours. Her smile was practiced, the kind you wear to survive, not because you feel it. "Are you ready to order, sir?" she asked. "Yes," Keanu replied gently. "I'll have the steak, medium, and just water, please." She blinked, surprised. Most customers demanded upgrades, sides, substitutions, as if complexity proved importance. "Of course," she said, scribbling it down. As she turned to leave, he added softly, "And, thank you for your patience tonight." She paused for half a second. That wasn't on the script. Her shoulders relaxed slightly before she nodded and walked away. Across the room, the manager paced like a general inspecting troops. He laughed loudly with the rich tables, slapped shoulders, and ignored the quieter guests. His eyes followed money, not manners. Keanu noticed everything. He noticed how certain customers were greeted by name. How others had to wait longer for the same service. How kindness seemed to have a price tag. When the waitress returned with his steak, she moved carefully as if afraid of making a mistake. Her eyes darted toward the louder tables, already bracing herself for the next complaint. She placed the plate down gently. "Here you go, sir." Keanu smiled. "It looks perfect." For the first time, her smile reached her eyes. But then she leaned in slightly and whispered, barely audible, "Please don't react." Before he could ask what she meant, she slipped the note under his plate and walked away. Now, as Keanu sat there watching her get pulled in 3 directions at once, the meaning of that note began to settle in. This wasn't admiration. This wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. She had noticed how he treated her, when he didn't have to. She had noticed the contrast between him and the others. And she had made a choice. Keanu slowly picked up his fork, then set it back down. Around him, the restaurant buzzed with life. Plates clattered. Glasses refilled. Laughter rose and fell. But at that corner table, something quiet and powerful was unfolding. This night wasn't random. It was a test. And everyone in that room was about to be graded, whether they knew it or not. The laughter from the center tables grew louder as the night went on. It wasn't the joyful kind. It was sharp, performative, the kind meant to dominate a room. A group of men in tailored suits leaned back in their chairs, wine glasses raised, voices cutting through the soft jazz. "Unbelievable service tonight," one of them scoffed. "I swear they hire anyone these days." Another laughed, nodding toward the waitress as she hurried past. "Look at her, can't even walk straight. Bet she messes up our order again." She heard them. Of course she did. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't stop moving. She balanced 2 plates, dodging chairs, forcing her smile back into place. Keanu watched from his corner table. He didn't intervene. Not yet. He had learned long ago that moments like these revealed more than confrontation ever could. At the nearby table, one of the men snapped his fingers sharply in the air. "Hey, miss." She turned immediately. "Yes, sir?" "This steak is overcooked," he said, pushing the plate away without even looking at it. "And this wine? I asked for the other year." "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I'll fix it right away." She reached for the plate, but he pulled it back just enough to make his point. "Do you even listen?" he sneered. "Or is this job too complicated for you?" Laughter erupted around the table. The manager noticed, but instead of stepping in, he joined them. "Don't worry, gentlemen," he said with a grin. "She's still learning. Still learning." The words landed like a verdict. The waitress nodded, cheeks burning, and turned away. Keanu's hand tightened around his glass. He looked down at the folded note resting beside his plate. Again, he didn't open it. He didn't need to. The message had already done its job. Across the room, the waitress stopped briefly at the service station, taking a breath. Her hands shook as she wiped them on her apron. Then the manager barked. "Table 12 is waiting. Move." She nodded and kept going. At table 12, a woman glanced at Keanu and rolled her eyes. "Why is he sitting here?" she whispered loudly to her companion. "Looks like he barely belongs." Her friend smirked. "Probably waiting for someone who won't show." Keanu lowered his gaze, not in shame, but in observation. He had seen this before. Not in restaurants, but in studios. In meetings. In rooms where people decided worth by surface, not substance. The waitress returned to his table to refill his water. "I'm sorry about the wait," she said softly. "There's no rush," Keanu replied. "You're doing great." Her eyes flicked up, surprised. "Thank you," she said, almost as if testing the word. Before leaving, she paused. "You didn't read it yet," she whispered, nodding toward the note. "I did," he said gently. She exhaled. Then, without meaning to, she said something she hadn't planned to say. "They don't see us," she said quietly. "Not really." Keanu met her eyes. "I see you," he said. Across the room, the laughter spiked again. One of the men raised his glass toward Keanu mockingly. "Hey buddy. Enjoying the show?" Keanu didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his pocket and took out his phone. Not to record. Not to call security. But to make one quiet decision. The conflict wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. But it was heavy. Because every person in that restaurant had chosen a side, whether they realized it or not. And the night was far from over. The restaurant didn't get louder. It got quieter. Not all at once, but in pieces. One table finished laughing. Another lowered their voices. Someone noticed phones coming out, not to record yet, but because something in the air felt different. Keanu remained seated. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand up. He didn't make a scene. That was what made it unsettling. The waitress moved through the room again, slower this time. Not because she was tired, but because she felt eyes on her. The same eyes that had dismissed her earlier now lingered with curiosity, suspicion, and something closer to discomfort. She stopped at the service station, pretending to organize receipts. Her hands trembled. She glanced toward Keanu's table. He met her eyes and gave a small nod. Nothing dramatic. Just reassurance. At table 12, the woman who had mocked him earlier leaned toward her companion. "Why is everyone staring?" she whispered. Her companion shrugged. "I don't know. Something feels off." The manager noticed too. He straightened his jacket and scanned the room, his smile fading slightly. When his eyes landed on Keanu, they narrowed, not in recognition but in irritation. He walked over. "Sir," the manager said, voice smooth but tight. "Is there a problem?" Keanu looked up calmly. No, he said. Is there? The manager forced a laugh. Good. Because you've been here a while and some guests are waiting. Keanu nodded slowly. I understand. The manager waited, expecting him to pull out his wallet, rush the meal, apologize for existing. Instead, Keanu took a sip of water. The silence stretched. Around them, conversation stalled. Chairs creaked. Someone cleared their throat. The manager felt it slipping. Will you be needing anything else? He asked. Keanu looked around the room before answering. Yes, he said quietly. I'd like to say something. The manager stiffened. This isn't really. It won't take long, Keanu replied. His tone wasn't demanding. That somehow made it worse. The waitress froze mid-step. The businessman looked up, amused again, expecting a harmless outburst from a nobody. Keanu stood. Not abruptly. Deliberately. He adjusted his jacket, the old, worn one, and rested his hands lightly on the table. I've been sitting here for over an hour, he said calmly. I've watched how people speak to your staff. How they speak about them. A few laughs fluttered, uncertain. Keanu continued. I've seen kindness treated like weakness. And arrogance rewarded with attention. The manager's smile cracked. This is a restaurant, sir, he said sharply. Not a stage. Keanu looked at him. Then why are so many people performing? That landed. The waitress swallowed hard. One of the businessmen shifted uncomfortably. Another checked his phone, suddenly fascinated by nothing. Keanu turned slightly, his voice still steady. The woman serving me tonight, he said, nodding toward the waitress, has been patient, respectful, and professional, even when she was mocked. The waitress's eyes widened. She didn't know who I was, Keanu continued. And that's exactly why this matters. The manager stepped closer. Sir, if this is about a discount. It's not, Keanu said softly. The room was silent now. Even the kitchen noise seemed distant. Keanu reached into his pocket, slowly, and placed his card on the table. I'm finishing my meal, he said. But after that, I'll be speaking with whoever owns this place. The manager blinked. I am the manager. Keanu nodded. I know. Then he added almost gently. And that's the problem. No applause followed. No gasps. Just a deep, collective stillness. People weren't reacting outwardly yet, but inside something had shifted. Because confidence had entered the room without raising its voice. And suddenly everyone wanted to know one thing. Who was this man really? The silence didn't break. It thickened. The kind of silence that presses against your ears, forcing people to confront thoughts they'd been avoiding all night. The manager stood stiff, staring at the card on the table as if it were a challenge. He picked it up between two fingers, glanced at it quickly, then frowned. He turned it over, then back again. His smile didn't return. I don't see the issue, he said, a little louder than necessary. We treat all guests the same here. Keanu tilted his head slightly. Do you? He asked. A few diners shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. A chair scraped the floor too loudly. The manager placed the card back down. Well, he said, straightening his jacket, if you have a complaint, you're welcome to email corporate. Keanu nodded. That won't be necessary. He reached into his pocket again, not hurried, not dramatic, and pulled out his phone. Still no one recognized him. Not yet. He tapped the screen once. Across the room, the hostess's phone buzzed. She looked down, confused, then pale. She looked up at Keanu, then at the manager, then back at Keanu. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The manager noticed. What is it? He snapped. The hostess swallowed. It's for you, she said quietly, holding up her phone. The manager scoffed and walked over, snatching it from her hand. He read the message. What? Twice. The color drained from his face. What's going on? One of the businessmen asked, half laughing. Is this some kind of joke? The manager didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Keanu again, really looked this time. The posture. The calm. The stillness that didn't need approval. Recognition crept in, slow and terrifying. No, the manager whispered. No, that's not possible. Keanu stood there quietly. A moment later, the front door opened. Not with drama. Just a soft chime. Two men and a woman stepped inside, dressed simply but confidently. They scanned the room, then walked straight toward Keanu. Mr. Reeves, the woman said, extending her hand. Thank you for waiting. Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Phones came out instantly. No way. That's him. Keanu Reeves? The businessman froze. The woman who had mocked him earlier covered her mouth. The waitress felt her knees weaken. Keanu shook the woman's hand politely. "Thank you for coming," he said. The manager backed away slowly, bumping into a chair. You're?" he stammered. Keanu turned to him calmly. "Yes," he said. "It's me." The room erupted. Whispers, shocked laughter, disbelief. "I didn't want special treatment tonight," Keanu continued, his voice steady but clear enough for everyone to hear. "That's why I came in quietly." He gestured gently toward the waitress. But what I saw couldn't be ignored. The woman beside Keanu spoke up. "I'm the regional director," she said. "And this establishment falls under my responsibility." The manager's mouth opened, then closed. Keanu nodded. "I asked her to observe," he said. "Not the food. Not the service speed." He paused. "The people." The director looked around the room. What she observed, she said, was selective respect. The businessman avoided eye contact. Keanu turned fully toward the waitress. She stood frozen, tears spilling now, embarrassed and overwhelmed. "You treated me with dignity when you had no reason to," Keanu said gently. "You didn't know my name. You didn't know my face." He smiled softly. "That matters." He turned back to the room. "Kindness shouldn't depend on status," he said. "And respect shouldn't be something you earn only when someone recognizes you." The manager dropped his gaze. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I didn't know who you were." Keanu's expression didn't change. "That," he said quietly, "is exactly the point." No one laughed now. No one interrupted. Keanu placed his card back on the table. "I'll be covering every bill tonight," he said. "But not as a gift." The room leaned in. "As a reminder," he continued, "that no one here paid for the right to humiliate another human being." The director nodded. "And effective immediately," she added. "We'll be reviewing management conduct." The manager looked up, panic written across his face. The power in the room had shifted. Completely. And for the first time that night, the waitress wasn't invisible anymore. The restaurant didn't erupt into applause. It didn't need to. The truth had already landed, heavy and undeniable. The manager stood frozen near the service station, his authority dissolving in real time. The posture that once screamed confidence now sagged under the weight of exposure. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally spoke. "I can explain," he said weakly. No one responded. The regional director didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She simply nodded once and stepped aside, allowing Keanu to speak. That gesture alone said everything. Keanu turned toward the waitress. She stood rigid, hands clenched at her sides, eyes wide and glassy. She had served hundreds of tables in that room, endured countless comments, smiles that weren't smiles, jokes that cut deeper than people realized. She never expected to be seen. "Can you come here?" Keanu asked gently. She hesitated. Not because she didn't want to, but because she had been trained her entire life not to step out of place. Slowly she walked forward. Every step felt unreal. "I want you to know something," Keanu said, his voice low enough to feel personal, yet clear enough for everyone to hear. "You didn't do anything extraordinary tonight." She looked confused. "You did what should be normal," he continued. "You treated a stranger with respect." A tear slipped down her cheek. "That shouldn't be rare," he said. "But too often it is." The director cleared her throat. "Effective immediately," she said, addressing the room. "This employee will be compensated for tonight's shift, triple pay." The waitress gasped softly. "And," the director added, "she'll be offered training for a supervisory role if she chooses." The room shifted. The manager's face drained further. I trained her," he said quickly, grasping for relevance. The director turned to him. "You tolerated behavior," she replied evenly. "That's not training." She gestured toward the office door. "Please step inside." The manager hesitated, then obeyed. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Not dramatic. Final. Keanu turned back to the tables. Some diners stared at their plates. Others stared at him. A few stared at themselves. "This isn't about punishment," Keanu said. "It's about accountability." He picked up his jacket. "I've been recognized in rooms where I didn't deserve it," he continued, "and ignored in rooms where I did." He paused. "Neither taught me as much as watching how people treat those they think can't do anything for them." One of the businessmen stood abruptly. I didn't mean," he began. Keanu raised a hand gently. "You don't owe me an apology," he said. "But you might owe one to her." The man swallowed. Slowly, awkwardly, he turned toward the waitress. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "It wasn't perfect, but it was something." Keanu nodded. "That's where change starts," he said. He walked to the register, signed the receipt, and left a tip large enough to make the cashier blink twice. Then he paused. One last time he looked around the room. "I hope," he said quietly, "that tomorrow night, when none of this feels fresh anymore, you remember how this felt." No one moved. Keanu walked toward the door. The waitress followed a few steps behind. "Mr. Reeves," she said, voice trembling. He turned. "I never meant to put you in the middle of anything," she said quickly. I wanted you to know you weren't invisible." Keanu smiled, not the smile of a celebrity but of a man deeply moved. "You didn't put me in the middle," he said. "You reminded me why it matters to step in." He nodded toward the room. "Don't let them take that from you." She nodded, tears falling freely now. The door opened. Cool night air rushed in. Keanu stepped out. No cameras followed him. No crowd waited outside. Just a quiet street. Inside the restaurant, something remained behind. Not fame. Not money. A lesson. One that would linger long after the tables were cleared. The restaurant eventually returned to normal. Plates were cleared. Glasses refilled. Receipts signed. But nothing was truly the same. People spoke softer now. They made eye contact. They said thank you, not out of habit but awareness. Because for one night, the illusion had been broken. The illusion that status decides worth. That money buys respect. That power excuses cruelty. Keanu Reeves walked away quietly just as he had arrived. No spotlight followed him. No headlines were written that night. No interviews were given. And that was intentional. Because the lesson wasn't about who he was. It was about who everyone else chose to be when they thought no one important was watching. The waitress finished her shift later than usual. As she wiped down her last table, she paused, looking around the room that had once felt hostile, heavy, unforgiving. Now it felt lighter. Not perfect, but changed. She realized something then. She hadn't been rescued. She had been validated. And there's a difference. Validation doesn't say, "You were weak." It says, "You were right to stay kind in a world that tries to harden you." That's the kind of power that lasts. Outside, the city moved on. Cars passed. Phones buzzed. People hurried home. Most of them would never know what had happened in that restaurant. And that was okay. Because real change doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it sits quietly inside someone, and alters how they speak to the next stranger they meet. This story isn't really about a celebrity. It's about moments. Moments when you're tired. Moments when you feel invisible. Moments when you think, it doesn't matter how I act, no one cares. Those are the moments that define you. Because character isn't revealed when people are watching. It's revealed when they aren't. Every day we all sit at different tables in life. Sometimes we're the customer. Sometimes we're the server. Sometimes we're the manager. Sometimes we're the one being judged silently. And every role comes with a choice. You can use it to lift someone, or to remind them how small the world already makes them feel. Respect costs nothing. But its absence costs everything. Keanu didn't change the restaurant with money. He changed it with attention. By noticing. By listening. By refusing to ignore what was uncomfortable. That's something anyone can do. You don't need fame to stand up for someone. You don't need wealth to be kind. You don't need power to show respect. You just need awareness. Because the truth is, the person you dismiss today might be the person who decides your future tomorrow. But even if they're not, they're still human. And that should be enough. So the next time you're in a restaurant, or store, or speaking to someone whose name you don't know, pause. Look at how you're treating them. Not because they might be important, but because you are. Kindness isn't weakness. Humility isn't silence. And respect isn't something you wait to be impressed into giving. It's something you offer first. Because the world already has enough noise. What it needs is more quiet strength. More people who do the right thing. Even when it goes unnoticed. More people who understand that how you treat the invisible says everything about who you really are. If this story made you think even for a moment, then it did its job. Type respect in the comments if you believe kindness still matters, red heart. And tell me where you're watching from. I want to thank every soul who chooses humanity over ego, folded hands. Because somewhere, right now, someone is watching how we act and deciding what kind of world this will be.